Morning, everyone. Oh, wow, okay, the audio works. Right. Morning, everyone. God, you're a brave bunch. You're starting off your morning with this, right? So I'm gonna make some caveats and apologies now. This is probably the wordiest presentation I've ever given, and there's no getting around it because throughout the presentation I will be referring to annexes, paragraphs, points. I will be having to read certain things verbatim because of the way it's been worded in the legislation. I don't know how Hardware Pioneers will do this, but they can release the presentation. Otherwise, please contact me directly and I'll email you the slides. So no need to take photographs. It's a relatively small screen as well. But I'll absolutely release the deck to you for whoever wants it, okay? So today this presentation is named 21-month compliance. Actually, this was written a few months ago, and really it's 17 months and counting, and I'll establish why in a minute. The subject here, as the title suggests, is around the Cyber Resilience Act, which is the EU's new piece of legislation, which is already coming into effect, but I'll go through the timeline of that. It's been discussed for many, many months, probably years, within the tech community. Well, it's here now. There's a lot of work to do, and as I said, I will try to do it justice, keep it interesting, and keep you awake, but it is very, very wordy, okay? So the agenda here, I'll do a brief introduction to the CRA. I'll go through, obviously, the key aspects. We'll cover the timeline, which is probably very important. Product categories and conformity assessment procedures. A lot of long words, right? And I'll try not to slip over them as I go along. And then on section 4 there, I will try to summarize everything you've seen in 1, 2, and 3, and 4. 5, I'm going to leave out. I'm not going to give you the hard pitch sale because normally I would do this in 40, 45 minutes. But in order to stay to time, I'm going to leave that out. But I will explain what it is. And then, and the same thing with 6. I really want to focus on conveying the points of the EU legislation rather than giving you the hard sell on Digi. Okay. Right, so CRA stands for Cyber Resilience Act. It's a European law number. We're going to start getting used to all these law numbers if you're not acquainted with them already. This is 2024, so clearly released last year, number 2847. The CRA significantly changes the EU product compliance landscape. How's it doing that? It's integrating stricter cybersecurity measures into the existing framework of CE marking. So CE marking's been around for years. Whatever products you may or may not be making, you've always had to put a CE marking, sell them in. The CE marking process, if you will, is now being upgraded with stricter cybersecurity requirements. Okay, and I do mean CE marking, which is mandatory for any product or software that contains digital elements to be sold in the EU. Both manufacturers and distributors have a responsibility for this throughout the entire product life cycle. Why is this new legislation in place? It addresses a twofold problem. First of all, poor level of cybersecurity in many products and an inadequate cybersecurity update. And the fact that all manufacturers claim that their products are secure, but as consumers or as businesses, how do we know to what extent this is true and whether it's from cradle to grave? The truth is that as consumers and as businesses, it's very difficult to determine which products are secure and how to configure them to ensure that protection throughout the product life cycle. The CRA aims to address these issues with a common set of standards for launching products or software with digital elements and a single framework for ensuring security requirements for planning, designing, development, and maintaining the product with an obligation of a duty of care throughout the product's life cycle. I warned you this was wordy, strap yourself in, okay? So let's talk about the CRA, and an important part here is obviously the regulation coming into force. Software and internet-connected products will carry the CE marking to indicate that they comply with the new requirements. This includes all products connected directly or indirectly to another device or a network, which means it applies to pretty much every connected product on the market today. There are certain exclusions in Article 2, which is called scope, and we'll cover that later on. But basically, this will allow businesses and consumers to make more informed decisions based on the CE marking as an indicator of security compliance. And of course, market surveillance authorities will be in place to enforce these rules to ensure compliance in the EU market. What happens if the products don't comply? Well, very simply, if you don't carry the CE marking, you can't sell in the EU. You'll have to possibly recall your product, withdraw your product, and as you see there, there are stiff penalties of up to 2.5% of your global revenue for failure to comply or persistent breaking of the law. I very much am told that it's going to be akin to GDPR and that the EU has every intention of really pushing this as a regulation and penalising persistent breakers. So, is this one law to rule them all? Not quite a lot. There are some exclusions, as I mentioned, covered in Article Scope. Does this mean that some products don't have to comply? No. The products listed in this table, for examples, are already covered by certain guidelines, going back to 2017 there. So, for example, 2017, 745 applies to medical devices, but 746 applies specifically to in vitro diagnostic medical devices. So there are already some laws in place. CRA is going to be an upgrade on that. What about spare parts? They're not required to, as long as they are used to replace identical components with digital elements and are manufactured in the same, according to the same specifications. And then finally, you can see, for obvious reasons, there is an exception there for products developed exclusively for national security, defense purposes, or to process classified information such as government. All right, we get to the all-important milestones. So this law began to brew at the beginning of 2020, right? So 5 years ago. But it was first published last year in the official journal of the European Union in November last year, and called 2847, as I previously mentioned. Let's really focus, though, on those red and warning sign timelines there, right? So, on December the 10th, 2024, this regulation came into force. So it's already there in its initiation and is fully binding and is directly applicable in all member states of the EU. Any OEM around the world that plans to market their connected products in the EU must comply. Many people mistakenly believe that this law will come into force at the end of 2027, specifically December 2027, so that they think there is a 3-year countdown from December just gone to December 2027. This is absolutely wrong, and I'll get down to these milestones here. The next milestone is actually June the 11th, 2026, when we'll probably all be at the next Hardware Pioneers, because that's when the date is, over at Excel. Where Chapter 4, Articles 35 to 51 shall apply. And this means that member states shall notify the Commission and other member states that they have already set up the bodies authorized to carry out conformity assessments under regulation. 3 months later, September the 11th, 2026, and this is why I talk about 17 months left to go, is when obligations of manufacturers kicks in, where manufacturers will have to report to ENISA, which is the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, about actively exploited vulnerabilities. So that's why I say it's not a 3-year clock, it starts next September in terms of obligations of manufacturers to work within the framework of the new law. What are actively exploited vulnerabilities? The technical definition is a vulnerability for which there is reliable evidence that a malicious actor has exploited it in a system without the permission of the system owner. The regulation then in its entirety fully applies of 2027, and all products must have a CE marking indicating compliance with the CRA. So, given the average embedded design cycle, the time is now to start thinking about this when designing products. One more thing, and this is quite important as well. Products placed on the market before December the 11th, 27 will be subject to this regulation only if after that date those products undergo a substantial modification. Now, this is really important because you may feel that if you've deployed your product before that date, it's kind of doesn't count and you're only thinking about that date going forward. The trouble is that if your customers come back to you and say, hey, I need the product updated for a new software patch or a new security or there's a new threat, and you make a substantial upgrade to that product in the field, CRA now kicks in, even though it was initially deployed before that date. So it is something to think about. It's not just a case of fire and forget. If you go back and make a substantial change to the product, it does suddenly become CRA compliant and falls within the remit of the legislation. Okay, before we go on to the obligations of manufacturers, it's worth just discussing how the CRA relates to the RED, or Radio Equipment Directive. Back in 2021, the Commission strengthened the cybersecurity aspect of wireless devices and products through RED Delegated Act, specifically Article 3, Paragraph 3, paragraphs points D, E, and F. In summary, it focused on EMC compatibility, health and safety, privacy and fraud protections. So it established there should be no known vulnerabilities at product launch. Software should be updatable. A conformity assessment should be carried out using a risk-based approach. It's not applicable to hardware components under RED. For consumer and industrial IoT products, self-declaration is enough. Medical devices and automobiles were exempt. How does this change with the arrival of the CRA? Well, it requires proactive and reoccurring vulnerability monitoring. Updates and patches must be provided. There are different levels of security according to product categorization. We'll cover that later on. So, for example, hardware components, unlike RED, do have to be third-party assessed. Consumer devices, self-declaration remains the same. But note, though, for industrial IoT devices, third-party assessment is now required. So you can see here quite starkly the differences between RED and the new CRA. Right? The RED Act came into force in August last year with a transition period of August this year. In the case of CRA, as I mentioned, the transition period is now and runs out in December 27 when the regulation will come into effect in its entirety. And it will replace the RED directive, specifically Article 3, Paragraph 3, DEF, not the whole Act, just that part, so that there's no conflict or overlap between the two sets of regulations. Right, this one's got a red title because this is really a lot, and I'll try to do it justice and capture everything in there, okay? So, and this is why I said we will issue the presentation to people because there's a lot to take in. Article 13 sets out the obligations of manufacturers, and Annex 1 lists the essentials of security requirements. The Annex has two parts. Part 1, which is security requirements relating to product properties, and Part 2, vulnerability handling requirements. Let's break that down into three phases: design and development, support period, and then the availability of security updates. During the first phase, design and development, the regulation establishes a set of obligations. Ensure that the product has been designed and developed and produced in compliance with the essential cybersecurity regulations set out in Annex 1. Conduct a cybersecurity risk assessment associated with the product, which will be documented and updated during the support period. We'll cover what the support period is going to look like. A cybersecurity risk assessment will indicate whether the security requirements are set out in parts 1 and 2 of Annex 1 are applicable to the product in question. A cybersecurity risk assessment should be included in the technical documentation required under Article 31, Annex 7. And this should all be implemented in the conformity assessment procedures of choice referenced in Article 32. We'll cover that in the next slide. Conformity processes established by the manufacturer are essential to cover security requirements and are set out in Annex 1, Part 2. And finally, manufacturers shall draw up the EU Declaration of Conformity in accordance with Article 28 and affix the CE marking in accordance with Article 30. Let's talk about the support period. This is again, one of those things where you've got to think about the timelines to it. The product's already been placed on the market. Support period begins from the minute you've dropped it in place. Right? During this period, the manufacturer is obliged to ensure that the vulnerabilities of the product, including its components, are handled effectively and in compliance with the essential security requirements. Manufacturers shall specify the period to reflect the length of time during which the product is expected to be in use. General rule of thumb, 5 years. Manufacturers shall include in the technical documentation the information that was taken into account to determine the support period of the product. So, just in case and to avoid all misunderstanding, the support period starts when the product is placed on the market. The end date of the support period is the last time the product was sold on the market plus 5 years. So the support period is still 5 years, but its end is a rolling deadline as long as the product is placed on the market. In fact, the countdown of the support period starts when the last batch of the product is sold, but actually the support period goes until the product end of life cycle or the last delivery to customers in the EU plus 5 years. Finally, the availability of security updates. Manufacturers shall ensure that each security update referred to in Annex 1, Part 2.8, that has been available to users during the support period remains available for a minimum period of 10 years or the remainder of the support period if that period is longer. Right, let's talk about regulations for reporting, right? Again, and this is the part that kicks in as of September this year, right? This is the reporting regulations. Manufacturers must simultaneously notify the CSIRT, which is the Computer Security Incident Response Team, designated as the coordinator for each member state of the EU, as well as ENISA, the governing body for the EU, of any actively exploited vulnerabilities or known incidents. As we mentioned earlier, this applies to all products falling within the scope and regulation placed on the market before December the 11th, 2027. With regards to notifications, manufacturers should provide an early warning notification of an actively exploited vulnerability within 24 hours of manufacturers becoming aware of it. The law further requires other obligations, but I've just tried to cover the main ones here in these texts, but there are more. These are the key ones because, as I said, it becomes key as of September the 11th this year. Sorry, September the 11th next year. Get my years mixed up. Right, so let's look at product categorizations. And this is actually a really important slide in as much as it shows how much work the EU still have to do on this compliance. Right. Conformity assessment procedures. Conformity assessment is a process of verifying whether the essentials and security requirements set out in Annex 1 have been fulfilled. The law establishes 4 categories of products. You've got default and open source, important products class 1, important products class 2, and critical products. Annex 3 covers class 1 and class 2, and Annex 4 covers critical products. Products not included in those 3 categories are by default classified as open source or default products. Right? It is, however, worth mentioning that in accordance with Article 7, Paragraph 4, by December the 11th of this year, the Commission shall be adopting an implementing act specifying the technical description of product categories for classes 1, class 2, important, and also class 3, critical. In other words, there is still, as of today, not enough information defined by them to precisely determine product categories. Does sound a bit kind of cart before horse, doesn't it? But that's where we are at the moment with this regulation. Right. So the bottom half of this slide here basically is a set of procedures or that can be used to determine where manufacturers can use to determine where their product could be categorized. Manufacturers get to choose just one of these. Obviously, the more critical the product, the fewer the options, the more demanding the conformity assessment procedures. So I did promise you that we would cover all of that in one slide. So this is a summary of all those things there. The fundamental pillars of the CRA: stricter cybersecurity. This is a security of law, but it raises the bar with stricter obligations and requirements that apply to design, development, maintenance, even after the product is obsoleted. It requires proactive removal of vulnerabilities and reoccurring updates. Conformity assessments. These are more detailed than previous laws to ensure compliance with essential or security requirements before launching a product to market. Early vulnerability notifications. As I mentioned earlier, any actively exploited vulnerability discovered must be reported to the authorities within 24 hours of its detection. Product classification, still work in progress, as I mentioned, but there are different categories according to their level of risk. Default, important, class 1, class 2, and critical, and the legislation for specific obligations for these products is work in progress for this year. Supervision and audits. These are much more intensive than previously managed to ensure continued compliance with the security requirements throughout the entire product cycle. And then transparency and communication. OEMs must provide clear and up-to-date information on product security features and any other relevant security issues. In a nutshell, the CRA is a cybersecurity legislation on steroids, and it introduces new concepts, obligations, and requirements that will change the nature of the EU market. So, who are we? Digi. I represent Digi. I'm the sales director for Europe. We're a manufacturer of hardware, but also software. Our hardware is RF modules or system-on modules or other products that we make in other divisions. But all of our products are glued together with a set of software features that we have. All of our products, by definition, are standard shipped with what we call Digi Trust Fence, which is a security infrastructure. It includes things like secure boot, anti-tamper, encrypted file systems, and so forth. And that ships around all of our products as standard, free of charge. We then offer 2 other services. We have the Digi Connect Core security services, which is an active, dynamic security framework which searches for new threats as they become available. It will do a software bill of material analysis, and because many people just pull routines from libraries and kind of maybe don't always do their due diligence, when they do that. And of course, particularly if you're using, say, Yocto Linux, you are pulling supposedly from trusted sources, but it does mean that other people have got access to those libraries and can look to see if there's ways to break into them. So Digi Connect Core Security Services does a software bill of materials, analyzes it, looks for new threats, advises you of those new threats, and then advises you of patches if they're available. If you choose to upload them, that's your decision, but that's what the service is there for. And then Digi Connect Core Cloud Services is our remote management platform that allows customers and OEMs to be able to mass deploy over-the-air updates to in-field devices. So we have a system there of inbuilt security, extended active dynamic security, and then a deployment management system that allows in-the-field upgrades. What we've done on the next few slides, I'm not going to go through them all, is we've gone through those two sections, part one, the Annex 1, part 1 and part 2, and we've pulled out the 14 key points of part 1 and the 8 key points of part 2, and we've mapped them all to Digi's offerings to see where an offering from Digi or a combination of offerings from Digi will apply to making that CRA compliance there. I will just now give you the final slide, which is, after all that, you may well have lost hope, right? Don't panic, okay? Don't believe that you'll never sell your products in the EU again, or that it's going to cost you a fortune or suck up scarce engineering resources to make your products compliant. I've got my own personal opinions that how this is going to be managed, I see very difficulty, because if you go back and look at some of those slides, what is a product that has no known vulnerabilities? It doesn't exist. What is software that has no known vulnerabilities over its product life cycle? It doesn't exist. So it will be interesting to see how this is managed. There are also laws, for example, that are being managed within the EU and actually in this country, which are giving greater power, shall we say, to consumers and businesses to go and do self-repair. Well, that by definition conflicts with the idea that no one should be allowed to tamper with the product. So for me, this CRA is not a milestone that's setting ground. I think it's going to evolve over many years as the real world comes back and says, that doesn't work, or you've just brought this market to a standstill because these laws are just so strict. So it is what it is at the moment, but I see it as being very much a fluid process over the next coming years. And I do see some of those dates perhaps moving as the EU starts to get feedback from significant OEMs and manufacturers and so forth. I would also say, look for the opportunity in this, right? If you are compliant with if your products are compliant, could this be a differentiator for you? Could you, by doing this first before your competitors, steal a march and get greater market share? Could, by doing this, you command or validate a higher ASP in your product because it is CRA compliant? And when you start looking at the services that you need in order to be compliant, such as having a remote management platform so that you can mass deploy security patches or mass deploy updates, there's also an opportunity there for you to harvest analytics and then maybe sell those analytics back to customers or use them to sell, preemptive maintenance programs. So there is an opportunity here, or my view is anyways, to look at the cost of compliance and maybe offset it with, as I said, a chance to differentiate yourself from your competitors and a chance to create a revenue stream from the data you've harvested from the infrastructure you set up in place. Half an hour, I've done that. And you've been really great sitting here and staying awake. You've been very kind audience. Thank you very much. like I said, if you want to get hold of this presentation, we're down on J5, so you can come and see me and my colleagues, or just contact me. My name is Ronald Singh. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to email that presentation out to anybody who wants it. All right? Have a great rest of your day. Enjoy the show.